It's going to be loud in here because of all the activity. And you won't be quiet. I will. Jamie will. They'll listen to you. Norm is here today, but he's teaching one of the classes, teenage classes. So please pray for him. He's in there with the teenagers. Last time we spoke, when I was up here, I had the little show and tell of how the Roman army and the legionnaires, that their armor, that their uniform, pretty much all of their armaments was used as an example and influenced the Apostle Paul when he wrote Ephesians and describing the best way that he could of the armor of God. So that was just one instance. And today, I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of show and tell things to bring, but if we ever do a series on how Christianity is like a battleship, I'll bring something really good in here that can relate to military history in the scripture. But today, we're going to expand on that influence of how the Roman, that was really more microcosm of the Roman military with a particular scripture. But today is going to be expanding is on how the Roman Empire as a whole helped influence and advance Christianity. So it kind of seems the opposite of what we're reading in the New Testament about the oppression of Rome and what was being done to the Jews and to the Gentiles. But there was a benefit of Christianity beginning when it did during the time of the Roman Empire at the zenith and apex of their influence, actually helped the spread of Christianity. So today we're going to talk about some of the major reasons for and some of the things that were going on in the Roman Empire. It's not an exhaustive list because there's many different things, but this is pretty much of a tackle a lot of the major subjects. But there's the reason why we need to know this is because it went from just 29 to 33 AD of 12 disciples in Christ to now of over 2 billion with a B Christians, largest religious group in the world. So the more that we see how that expanded, the better we can appreciate how the Old Testament was preparing the way for Christ to come. God was also preparing the rest of the world for then Christianity to take off. So everything was ripe for this expansion, and it came from an entity that was not, at this time, in the first century, not Christian based. So, looking at these factors right here, we're going to start off. Oh, did I lock her out?
No, we did.
Oh, okay. You have a password? So, roads and sea. So, the Roman army utilized the roads from Rome into every province, territory, all around the Roman Empire. And we're talking about as far west as the island of England, all the way through just north of Germany, all the way to the Euphrates, and of course the south with Italy and all the regions that touch or come close to that area. So there were roads or sea routes that the Roman Empire built with a special technology for roads that would not deteriorate, that they would stand the test of time. There are still, if you go to certain parts of Europe, there are still roads that the Roman Empire built that have course, there's a lot of maintenance now after 2,000 years, but they were built to last. So this wasn't a wagon trail. Yes, ma'am.
We hiked through Spain in 2017. We walked.
Did you see it?
Through Spain, and several times we walked on Roman roads.
If y'all
Bridges.
and bridges too. See, and that's what's amazing is those stood up. She was mentioning that in 2017 saw the same thing in Spain with the Roman, the roads and the bridges. So their technology and architecture was phenomenal. What was interesting is they got a lot of that architecture and technology from Greece. And there was always this learning mode. And we talked about it when I had my uniform up here, is that the Romans incorporated things and items that were a pretty good idea, so we're going to do it. So the roads, you've heard the expression, all roads lead to Rome. There's a reason for that, because they did. They not only did they build these, the Roman military then protected them. There were still robbers. Traveling was still very hazardous, but it was not as bad in the Roman Empire as it was in all the other parts of the world, because the Roman military, the army, was not just a military going to war. They were also the local police, if you will. They would check to make sure that the Roman citizens and also travelers from around were protected and safe, because if they weren't, those roads and sea routes affected the economy, because the trade was coming back and forth. There were pirates through the Mediterranean, and the sea routes, the Roman Navy would do the same thing. They would protect those routes and the like, and also not just for trade, but for travel. So because it was so much easier to travel, you would have, of course, Apostle Paul is one that comes to mind, but all of the apostles were able to travel a whole lot quicker, safer, faster than before the Roman Empire came in and had this new technology of road building and how to utilize the military in a police keeping mode. The military kept the peace. You've heard the expression that as you get older, you don't care about being right, you just want peace. I want everything to be quiet in my house. The Roman Empire, in a way, after they conquered a territory, they wanted peace. Not peace that, okay, you are now independent again, just no uprising. Just, you can keep your culture, you can do whatever you have been doing, as long as it doesn't go against Caesar. It doesn't do anything that's going to cause upheaval and rioting. The Caesar control, the emperors were not really fans of the local province judges and folks in the leadership capacity. If they couldn't keep the peace, they were fired. And that was the best thing that could happen to them. So it was to their interest, to the local government, to make sure that everything was nice and quiet and that nothing disturbed Rome. They didn't want any bad news coming from Judea or from even Britain or anywhere else, or anything that might cause a bad look to these folks who are in charge of leading it. So when the disciples and the apostles go to a country, into a territory, they weren't in a war-torn country. Everything was peaceful. Imagine after Iraq or Afghanistan, and while the battle is going on, you send in missionaries in at that time. Well, I would say the life expectancy would be really low. So the apostles were able to go to these different territories of the Roman Empire and feel like that they were not going to be in a war zone. There were little small uprisings, but usually that was from an attacking force that was not in the Roman Empire. if the Goths or the Visigoths would try to attack, it was put down really fast. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, about how that even became an issue with the expansion of Christianity. Did you have your hand up?
No.
Oh, just, okay. Sorry.
No, I was gonna say Paul, had an advantage.
Oh yeah, Paul knew, because he knew the ins and outs of the Roman way they do things.
He was a Roman citizen.
He's a Roman citizen.
Hey, I'm a Roman citizen. I wonder if they ever looked at his papers.
I don't know if they had a walking license at the time they couldn't do that. Religious tolerance. So, as we saw at the early first century, there really wasn't a tolerance, because it was Caesar worship, it was emperor worship, and there was a really sensitive feeling of the Roman emperors that they did not want any kind of competition. Well, then they realized, okay, that's not keeping the peace. If we have those that are really fervent about a particular god that they worshiped, and especially when they conquered Greece, then they had a whole new ball game, because now we're talking about over 25, 30 gods, and you're going to select. So no, Rome then say, okay, actually that's a pretty good idea. We're going to incorporate what y'all have, along with, as long as all of those other gods, we're also going to have the emperor. So they just added to it. So that tolerance came that, okay, we will, instead of being solo, just the emperor, it will be these other gods, and we will tolerate that as long as it doesn't, again, cause any sort of distraction or disruption in the flow of things. So they were tolerant. They didn't accept it, but they tolerated it. And for having that mindset, that allowed the Apostle Paul to and others to go talk about this unknown God that the Greeks knew about. They pretty much covered all the bases, but there was this other God that they heard about, but they don't know. So Paul was able to say, hey, you see that temple or that stone? It says, to the unknown God. Hey, guess what? I can tell you, you're already worshiping this God. Let me tell you who this unknown God is. So now you know the rest of the story of who this is. So because of that tolerance, Paul was able to make some inroads where he's not talking about something so foreign, because they already were worshiping this unknown God. Paul was filling in the blanks. Expanded the military recruitment. When I had the uniform up here, the only way that you could be an actual soldier at that time is you had to be a Roman citizen and or exclusively Italian descent. As the army grew and there was more peacekeeping groups that they would leave troops in, when they were not getting, they needed more, but there was not as many recruitment because of other activities that we will talk about later. They weren't at war, but they were keeping the peace around the borders. So the Roman military decided, we can use some of these non-Roman, non-Italian folks who want to be a part of the Legionnaires. So there were Christians who signed up. There were Jews. There were people from the conquered territories that then they had to say that they will, take that oath of office, I guess the best way to put it. That a lot of the Christians at the time, the best way to put it is with their fingers crossed, I obey Caesar. Knowing that, okay, this is a great paying, I have a job, my loyalty to the empire is not going to be questioned. I don't want anything, even though I'm a Christian, I don't want anything to come upon my family thinking that we're this faction that wants to have an uprising, so we won't have any sort of honor to Caesar. It was a pick and choose thing. And at this time, remember, there's no official Christian list of rules that we do and don't believe. It's still a brand new religion. So the church in Ephesus, they were thinking the way life was as a Christian is different than the church in Corinth. So there's not this great big list of rules until we start getting over here, and we will talk about that. But until then, it's kind of loosey-goosey. So with a lot of the Christians who were saying, yeah, I'll be a Roman soldier because of all the benefits, and also I know that my family will be safe because I won't have the Romans in saying, oh, wait a minute, he's not going to take the oath of office, and they're going to do an uprising. So it was kind of a preemptive way of keeping the peace with their family. So by doing that, these Christians who are now in the military, they're going to all these different territories and sharing the gospel. In England, outside of London, I don't know if you've been there, but there's structures that were built by the Romans who were there helping the British, they weren't called British, but on that island, some of the technology, learning how to build certain roads and ramps and the like. And the message from the Christian Roman soldiers were getting to, that's how it spread into England. I mean, it's phenomenal. So that if the Roman Empire didn't have a military that allowed them to do that, who knows what countries would or would not have been exposed to Christianity. Common language. There were only 2 languages at this time. Everything west, which was considered west, was Latin. Everything else was Greek. That's why, when you're, is there any pilots, airline pilots, or anyone that flies? All the pilots must speak English. There's a unified word. Did you say, oh, you're not a pilot? Oh, he's waving. Okay. He wants to be a pilot. He's waving that I'd like to be.
I'm a pilot on the internet.
Oh, okay, gotcha. I had a G.I. Joe pilot. Does that qualify? The common language in that whole Mediterranean area, what it was called, it's Greek, but it's called Koine Greek, Koine. So I'm probably not pronouncing it correctly, but it's a Koine Greek. But it's a common Greek language that was spoken everywhere because it was the official trade. If you were trading, if you had commerce, communications, was in Greek. Just like the airlines, no matter what country you're from, if you're going to fly, you've got to learn English because the air traffic controllers, it's all standardized. It's similar to that. So the New Testament is written in Greek. And since everyone is speaking in Greek, and pretty much the entire Roman Empire is Greek in conversation, when the apostles go out and spread the gospel, they don't have to have, English to Roman to Spanish to, they were able to just explain it and talk about it without having to worry about it, a language confusion. So because Rome wanted to centralize that language, they were, of course, in the certain countries that would speak their own, it was also encouraged, like in Germanic parts of the empire, the language was still there, but you better also learn how to speak Greek or Latin. Codex. Who has ever heard of this particular type of communication? It sounds very computer-like. Codex was the first, it was the first notebook. It was the first legal pad. It used to be papyrus and then parchment, and it was a way of drilling a hole in this paper and wrapping leather around it and then you would have your notes written down. But if you wanted something that you were writing down and you want to use it again, they had wax that was poured into a frame about the size of a book. Some of them were small enough, about this size, and it had a stylus. And they would write notes, and they had their own shorthand. So when they're in the commerce in the Roman Empire, when they're taking an order, they would write it down, and it was reusable, because then you flatten what you wrote and just write again. The apostles, or basically anyone who was missionaries that was spreading the word, they were basically transpiring whatever they had of the scripture. And if it was in wax, then they could do shorthand. Or if it was in paper form or papyrus, it's like a fruit. Yes, thank you. It was much larger, but it's not like our paper now. It could withstand a lot of travel. And they would just keep adding these leather strings to where you had this little your miniature Bible, your miniature word, to be able to, when these missionaries and apostles would go to these countries, they're able to bring this out and say, well, let me tell you about such. Before the Codex, it was strictly always just paper in scrolls, and that was going to be real hard and you saw, everyone knows what Jesus told the apostles what to bring with them. Don't bring an extra tunic. Don't even bring extra food. You just go. So you don't have a utility belt with scrolls. So because of the Roman technology of creating this codex, it pretty much made all the other forms of communication in writing obsolete. And it was the precursor to eventually the Gutenberg press. Now we're talking a long time later, but it was the thought process of, it doesn't have just to be one manuscript. The Romans admired compassion eventually. There was, at the very beginning, we talked about how the Roman Empire we are the military, we are, you need to be strong, you take over. Compassion is a weakness. I don't know if any of y'all seen the movie 300, but there was most cultures all through that area had, if you had a child that was deformed or just wasn't right, they would abandon the child. And most times they would die on their own. It was because they were not going to grow up to be healthy. There were going to be attacks upon the empire of having to take care of them. So they were either killed or just abandoned. That was why over time, the Roman citizens were noticing that this small group faction of people they were calling them followers of Jesus were going to these places where mothers were just dumping their kids because they were not right, and they were adopting them. The groups of Christians were taking these kids, and they were taking care of them. And the citizens were wondering, where is our big pile of abandoned babies? It was getting smaller and smaller, and finally realized that the Christians, this small group of people, were doing this. And it was in Rome, just in Rome proper. It wasn't a lot of people, but they were very active. And so when they were, that made an impression where it changed the perception that power is not always from excluding compassion. There is power in having compassion. So because of the Greek philosophers of their combating nature with Rome was the mighty military strength, no compassion. You attack, and you de-emphasize weakness. Greek philosophy was, oh, hold on, wait a minute, there is good in compassion. There is good in thinking of others. Well, finally, a light bulb started going on when the Roman Empire started seeing these Christians, these people who were doing something that the Romans were not doing. At the very end, I'm going to read you something that one of the emperors toward the end of the 3rd century said about that very thing. And it's really is phenomenal when you think about the impact of not a revolt, not a military takeover, not protest. It was the quiet, unannounced caring for the sick, caring for the abandoned, caring for those that the Roman Empire was saying, no, we don't want to have anything to do with them, but these Christians were. I mean, it's a lesson even for today, actually. Emperor Constantine. Constantine was the Christian emperor. He was as bad as Nero was. Norm has talked about how the horrible things that went on before Constantine, but Constantine became pretty much the standard bearer of Christianity at the time. Before he came to power, the attacks on Christians went on for so long that the military was even skeptical of anyone wanting to join that was not an Italian. Even with the recruitment, they still had a skeptical eye on them of, what is this Christian thing? Let me read you something about, I don't really have this memorized, but it's phenomenal, incredible. I just assumed Constantine just had someone knocked on his door knocker that Wednesday night and say, hey, would you like to come to, Rome Church of Christ and come see us? And he was baptized and it was cool. It didn't work out that way. Before a crucial battle in 312 AD, Constantine said that he had a dream where he was told to paint the Christian symbol on the shields of his soldiers. At that time, how the Jewish symbol had the Star of David, the Christian symbol was kind of a cross and X, and it had Alpha, Omega. So there was these signs that showed what was Christian. And basically it was not a cross this way, but an X, but it was implied to be a cross. He did this. Okay, I told you about the Christian symbol on the shields of his soldiers. He did this and won the battle. He then, later in the year 337, decided that, in thanks to God, he would allow the whole empire to worship any religion freely, including Christianity. The future of Christianity was assured when Constantine himself converted to Christianity. As you might expect, the old religions did not disappear all at once, but Christianity spread fast throughout the empire. From that point on is when Christianity took off in a way that mirrored the Roman Empire and pretty much the way that the military was operated, because the Emperor Constantine, he's in Rome. Everything leads to Rome. So he figured just this factions of Christians are all over in different churches. He's going, whoa. Y'all need to organize this, because there's nothing consistent. You go to Corinth and it's this. You go to Ephesus and it's this. Y'all need to get your act together, and if you need help, I will help you organize that. And that's where the leadership structure of the Roman Empire influenced the early church. I'm not saying the early church of the Roman Catholic Church. So Rome being, that's because that's where it was located. So that whole hierarchy of that you see in the Catholic Church is taken from what the Roman emperor leadership and also the Roman army. So the Pope was the political leader of the church, which would also have been Caesar. The cardinals and the bishops, cardinals helped the Pope run the church. The bishops ran the diocese in the areas of several churches. Those would have been the centurions. Those would have been the second in command in the military. You'd have a centurion. You'd have another one that's above that I cannot remember, but it was like a command structure. Or I guess in politics it would be like these were senators over a certain area and a state as opposed to the nation. Priests also were individual churches that administered the sacraments, including communion, matrimony, and baptism. So now we're talking about individual one-on-one, which would have been the foot soldier. It was a command structure that worked for centuries. So for the Roman army, so Constantine, with a lot of nudging to the Christians in Rome of saying, y'all need to get together and here's the format y'all could use. So that whole structure allowed the church at that time to say, okay, we're not going to have 5 or 6 or 7 or 12 different ways that, or laws, or I don't say can or can't do, but this is what we believe, I guess the best way to put it. So they combined all that into the same way that the Roman military was, and that's when it really took off, because now it's like, okay, now we have a plan. Now we have our codex that we can say, okay, in Rome they say, okay, we're going to do this. Okay, take this to Ephesus. Okay, you take this to wherever. The only problem with that is there's way too many. When you have the leadership structure of people who are still clinging on to the Jewish traditions, because there were Messianic Jews, so there were those who really pushed against that, and that's where that whole split again happened. There were those that going, no, wait a minute, we don't want to be in a like what the Roman military used to be. They were more accustomed to what they were taught by the early apostles and disciples. So that growth from having this leadership structure still didn't mean that it was all a happy family. There were still those factions of saying, I really don't want to do that. And that was where the leadership in the early church was like trying to put a spilled can of BBs all back into the cup again, because they're all over. So it didn't happen immediately, but the growth did happen. Antonine Plague, or Antonine, I don't sure, but Antonine Plague. So the year was 166 AD, and the Roman Empire was at the zenith of their power. Victorious Roman legions on the north part of the territory were fighting an invasion by a small territory. Why they would try to invade a Roman Empire area is beyond all historians, but they did. And it was a short conflict. The Roman legions were coming back, of course, with the spoils of the war, who they fought, but they also brought back what was the best way to put it is smallpox. So there was this plague that attacked that all of the legions. I don't want to say legionnaire disease because I guess that's been taken, but the legions coming back as they started going through because they're marching back to Rome. When they couldn't go into Rome proper, the armies had to stay outside of a certain circumference of the city of Rome. Hence, that way there was no military overthrow. They had to stop right at the city limits but they were really close. But as they're marching, now they're still in the Roman Empire. So they're spreading this. Now, of course, it's being so confined to the army, they were dropping like flies. And then as they got closer to Rome, the Roman emperors and leaders would come meet their troops. That was always kind of their deal of, okay, you can't come in here, but we're going to come out there and say, thank y'all for defeating this action going up north. So I'm going to read you this. The Roman Empire, over the course of the next 20 years, and this happened in 166, the next 20 years, an event that altered the landscape of the Roman world. The Antonine Plague, as it came to be known, would reach every corner of the empire, and it's likely would claim the life of Emperor Lucius Verus himself in 169. The effect on Roman armies was devastating. Proximity to sick fellow soldiers in less than optimum living conditions made it possible for the outbreak to spread rapidly through the legions. The empire was similarly struck when people were bringing it back to Rome after greeting the military units. There was the number I found here. It was 200,000 a day, which through the empire, and it's basically they're saying 5 to 8% of the population just disappeared. So now you've got this pestilence, this plague going on, not just in Rome, but in all different parts of the empire. And so this has a two-pronged approach. So how would the Antonine Plague cause the advancement of Christianity? Well, you remember the admired compassion that the Romans started seeing that these group of Christians, what were they doing. So who was caring for these sick legionnaires, these sick soldiers? Were the Christians. So they were taking care of them. They were also trying to bring hope, saying, I know this is horrible. It's going to be okay. It's going to be all right. We don't know how this is going to end, but God has this. They were adding more comfort. It's when devastation happens, when we had 9/11. For the next week, it seemed like there were more church attendance. There was more people. Their faith grew. There became this call to worship, this call to faith during the time of just a national crisis. This is what happened in Rome, in the Roman Empire. There was this national crisis because this plague was hitting. So because of the Christians caring for these sick Roman soldiers, they're caring for the soldiers that used to persecute these same people. Now they're caring for them. And by the way, they're also saying, it's okay. It's all right. There's hope. There is hope. As opposed to the negative of, it's 10 o'clock and you're going to die tomorrow. There was a hope for that. That impressed, or at least made an impression, that message now is spreading. These Christians, there's something to that. They're not the people that Nero said they were. They're not these horrible, cannibals, that have all these weird things that were said about them. No, they were seeing the compassion that came from all that. The spreading the word through with Apostle Paul. The best way I could put this is Rome allowed Greeks to be Greeks. That they were the intelligentsia. They were they sat around and thought about thinking. There was these philosophies of and it's in Scripture. The Epicureans were hey, live and let live, eat well today because tomorrow you may die, but that's okay. Don't worry about it. Just, it's everything is a, Pancho's buffet. Just, go. It's everything's okay. And then you had the Stoics, and the Stoics were, and they were more to the Romans' liking because they were very, well, you've seen them. They're very set back and let's think about this. There's a reason for all this, and I'm not going to let emotions, really take over. There should be a nice order to things. There's probably a one God. There's probably a higher that they didn't know of the Christian God at the time. They were just thinking there's got to be one higher power. We don't know who it is. Hence the to the unknown God. So because Paul, as we mentioned, Paul being already a world traveler, knowing that what the Roman Empire was like, because Rome allowed Greeks, as long as they weren't causing a commotion and not an uprising, Paul and other apostles were able to go into these different major trade areas, Thessalonica, Athens, all through that area, and it changed if they were on the coast. So all of these great places that had the trade and bringing in visitors and travelers, Paul was able to be there and speak their language. Hence y'all are already worshiping the God that I'm going to be telling you about. You have a graven image of him, this idol, you're thinking that we're making this image for him. He goes, I'm going to tell you about a God who you were made in God's image. He reversed it. He was already using the way to talk to Greeks, which was different than the way, because Romans wanted to see it. Romans wanted to see, that's why it took so long for them to accept. They wanted to see that the Christians were over there caring for the sick and the abandoned. The Greeks, okay, if you're doing it, okay, that's one thing, but why? Why are you doing it? And Paul and other apostles knew that. Had the Roman Empire made Greek think and be Roman, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, they left it right there. If you were not causing a problem, when you're in Greeks, do as the Greeks do. That's fine, just don't cause a problem. Because of that, the majority of the citizenship of Greece, these city-states, were Gentiles. There were non-Jews. There were Jews there, but it grew exponentially with the Gentiles because the rules were lessened that, you mean we don't have to get circumcised if we want to be a Christian? You mean we don't have to observe these particular laws and things? Paul was the perfect apostle. God sent the right person for that message to the Greeks, who that's the way they thought, that they don't have to become Jew, they become a follower of Christ. And again, that's where, and we still have it today, where you have Messianic Jews. You have Christians that there's no other religion but this one, but they maybe previously were in another type of congregation or a religion, but they can relate to that person, the other group. So when the time comes for conversations about why do you believe what you believe, that you have experience. You know your audience. Paul knew his audience. We are called to do the same thing, is to know your audience. I'm gonna end it with this. This is a quote from one of the emperors, who's one of the last. His name was Julian the Apostate. That always makes me uncomfortable with that name. So he was one of the last ones before Constantine came into power, and the writing was on the wall already. The Christians were starting to already make a huge dent and impression in Rome, not just in these pockets, but it was really growing. And Julian did not like this one bit, but he understood the power of these Christians. And when he wrote the following, these impious Galileans, the Christians, they had different names. These impious Galileans not only feed their own, but ours also, welcoming them with their agape. They attract them as children are attracted with cakes. Whilst the pagan priests neglect the poor, the hated Galileans devote themselves to works of charity, and by a display of compassion have established and given effect to their pernicious errors. Such practice is common among them and causes contempt for our gods. The day right before he passed away, the Roman Empire would not succumb to political upheaval or force, but to the love of Christ. Julian's dying words in AD 363, so we're right before Constantine took over, he said, Vici Galilee, which is you Galileans, Christians, have conquered. So always keep that in mind when we don't see uprisings of Christians trying to change the world, or if it's something radical change the world. Those that changed the world were taking care of the sick, taking care of the abandoned, and love, and remembering that that's the way Christ won, was from the act of complete love. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
My question is an attitude. Just
Yeah.
the sermon today, loving, loving, showing it, not just
Yeah, it's not just saying it.
that other people can see. He saw it.
And everyone's different. The Romans changed because they did see it. And the Greeks thought, okay, I see it, but I want to know why you're doing it. We're called to do both. Because someone's going to say, why are you doing that? That's interesting. You say, I follow someone named Jesus.
I wonder if part of that also, that change in the Roman Empire and the Roman soldiers, didn't start at the cross, because they had all that firsthand. They beat him. They did all. He's up there saying, "Forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." And that centurion,
Yeah.
he proclaimed Christ. He proclaimed that.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, there were seeds planted there.
Oh, yeah.
In the among the soldiers as well.
When I see that, Johnny was talking about that it maybe even started at the crucifixion of Christ, when the Roman centurion saw, obviously. I still think of John Wayne going, surely this man was the Son of God. Is that pretty good, John Wayne? Needs work. Needs work.
He's been gone long enough.
Yeah, that's right. Thank y'all. Thank y'all very much.